What's up, everybody? I'm Drew Mazurek with Universal Audio, and welcome back to UAD Spotlight. In this video, I want to shine a spotlight on one of my favorite compressors of all time, the Distressor. I've been using the hardware since the late 90s, so I know this thing very, very well. And the UAD Distressor absolutely nails both the sonics and functionality of the hardware. It is the definitive Distressor plugin for sure. My goal with this video is to give you a detailed walkthrough of what this compressor is doing both on the surface and, importantly, behind the scenes, so that you'll get better and more comfortable using it in your productions. Along the way, I'll sneak in some tips and tricks as well. So if you already own it, load it up on a track so that you can follow along. And if you don't, get your demo started so that you can follow along as well. The Distressor is a VCA-based compressor with a wide array of controls that allow it to excel at any compression task. One of its core strengths is the sheer number of ratios that it offers. And that's actually my first tip for you. When thinking of the Distressor, rather than think of it as one compressor with multiple ratios, I want you to think of each ratio as being its own compressor. Throughout this video, I'm going to point out why that's the case. So make sure you watch all the way through so that you don't miss any of the details. Even if you know the Distressor, I hope you're going to learn something from watching this video. And let's get started with a walkthrough of the user interface. And I want to talk you through in detail what each knob, button, and switch is doing. Let's get started. Okay, so let's get started in the lower left corner with the Headroom Screw. Now, I've made a full video on the Headroom Screw. I'll put the link in the description. And if you've not seen that yet, you might want to hit pause here, go watch that, get the full story, and then come on back. But effectively, the Headroom Screw is a control that we've added to pretty much all UAD compressor plugins. And it is a global gain staging tool that effectively allows me to turn it clockwise to drive more signal into the model and therefore get more compression. And of course, counterclockwise to reduce the signal going into the compressor and get less compression. This is especially important on a fixed threshold compressor like the Distressor. And of course, this is a plugin exclusive. The hardware did not have it. Okay, on to the input control to the right. It simultaneously adjusts the input gain amp that we have fully modeled in the hardware. This is not just some digital control here. It also modifies the threshold depending on which ratio you have chosen. This goes back to what I was saying before about each ratio being its own compressor. And of course, if you want more compression, you will turn this control up. Next up is the attack time, which adjusts the onset of compression. The range here is 50 microseconds to 30 milliseconds. However, when set to 0, you can achieve even faster times at ratios of 2:1, 3:1, and 4:1. This goes back to what I was saying earlier about each ratio having its own unique behaviors. You'll notice that this knob just goes from 0 to 10. There's no timing references here. And this is the reason for that, because it does change per ratio. And then we have release, which is how quickly the compressor will let go when the signal has dropped back below the threshold. And our range here is 0.05 seconds to 3.5. But again, in 10:1 opto mode, which we'll talk about in a little bit, you can have release times as long as 20 seconds, depending on the program material. So at this point, I thought it might be useful to take a look at some rendered waveforms to help visualize what attack and release are actually doing to your audio. So this top clip is just a rendered tone that is soft, loud, soft. And that will be below the threshold, above the threshold, and below the threshold again. And so when we run it through the Distressor at various settings, in this second clip, I have it set to slow attack and slow release. And so you'll see that what happens here is because the attack is slow, the transient is allowed to poke through before the compression phase kicks in. And then, of course, when the signal drops back below the threshold, because the release is set slow, it'll take a while to return to its normal state. And then the clip below that is the exact opposite. It's fast attack and fast release. And as you can see here, at the beginning, when the signal breaks the threshold, it is compressed quickly. And when it drops back below the threshold, it lets go quickly. So I hope that these rendered waveforms have added a little bit of color onto the description and to help drive the points home in a little bit more of a visual manner. And next up to the right is the output control. And it, of course, is the final output of the plugin. And here, once again, we have fully modeled all of the non-linearities of the output amplifier of the hardware. This is not just a digital control. And finally, on the lower right-hand side, we have our mix knob for easy parallel compression. This is also exclusive to the plugin. You won't find it on the hardware. And of course, we can click on comp for full amount of compression, or dry to hear what it sounds like without compression. And then, of course, adjust as we see fit in between to blend that wet and dry or uncompressed and compressed. So let's move to the upper portion of the user interface and talk about the gain reduction lights. The first thing I want to draw your attention to is there's a lot of lights here. Guess what? Don't be afraid to use them. They're there for a reason. This compressor is capable of lots of compression while still sounding good. If you're used to your stock DAW compressor starting to sound funny at 4 or 5 or 6 dB of gain reduction, get that out of your head right now. The Distressor is capable of massive amounts of compression while still sounding really good. Now, below that, we have a red LED labeled Redline. This indicates two things: 3% total harmonic distortion, or THD, as well as output clipping. And below that, we have an amber LED, which indicates 1% THD. And the red line, don't think of that as being always bad. If it sounds good, it is good. It's just letting you know that you're at that point, but it can still sound good. And then, of course, the amber 1% THD LED lets you know that things are getting hot, but you're not at that clipping point just yet. And to the left of that, we have a bypass button. And one thing to note there is that when you press the bypass button, the gain reduction lights do not go off. So next, let's talk about ratio. The ratio determines the amount or the intensity of the compression. And the Distressor has several, and each one is unique, as I said at the top of the video. They each have their own unique compression curve and threshold offset. So it's not like most compressors where you just increment up or down to get more or less. Each one is unique. Now, to get around on this, we have a ratio button that I can click and it will move left to right. And if I shift click, it will move right to left. There's a third option, which is to click directly onto the LEDs. That's actually my preference. That's how I like to do it. And the reason for that is if I use the toggle method, eventually I'll circle around to a 1-to-1 ratio. And if audio is playing, 1-to-1 means no compression, input equals output, and you can get a level jump. So I prefer to click directly on the LEDs to avoid that. Now, speaking of 1-to-1 ratio, why would a compressor have 1-to-1 ratio? Well, this is the mode that allows the Distressor to be a saturator or a clipper in conjunction with the audio circuit that we're going to talk about in a few minutes. This is not unlike taking an 1176 and putting it into off mode, where the compression circuit is deactivated, but you still get to drive signal through it. We can do that with the Distressor, and it's really cool. Next up is 2-to-1, 3-to-1, and 4-to-1. These I mentioned earlier when we were talking about the attack setting. These are 3 modes that have the fastest onset of compression. Then we have 6-to-1, and then 10-to-1, which is opto mode, when in conjunction with the attack and release knobs being at 10 and 0 respectively. This emulates the character of an LA2 optical compressor. And then we have 20-to-1 and nuke. These are awesome when you really want to crush something, room mics, what have you, and it's often great in conjunction with the mix control to blend in some of the original signal. So tons and tons of control here. You can see why I had you think of each ratio as its own unique compressor, and understanding all of these details are going to help you use this plugin much better for sure. All right, on to the next section. So let's move to the right and talk about the detector section. The first thing to note here is that these are not in the audible audio path, and rather they are in the detection circuit, and they influence how the compressor behaves. So the first option is no LEDs lit, and that will have full range audio in the detection circuit, and the compressor will react to that. However, with low frequency, heavy material, excessive low end in the detection circuit can trigger more compression than maybe you would like, since low frequencies are more powerful. So our first option here is to click the detector button once, and we will engage a 100 Hertz, 6 dB per octave high pass filter only in the detection circuit. It will not impact your audible audio, but it will make that compressor ignore a little bit of the bottom end and therefore react a little bit smoother. Now, if we click it again, we get what is called a band emphasis filter centered around 6K. This is great for all sorts of sources, but particularly vocals, and it will make the compressor a bit more sensitive to this special range of frequencies that can sometimes be associated with harshness. So engaging this filter will make the compressor react a bit more when those frequencies are present. If I click the detector button a third time, you'll notice that it adds the two together. This is what I do on every vocal track. I don't want the low end to trigger excessive compression, and I want the compressor to be extra sensitive in that range of the band emphasis filter. One more press and I have engaged the link circuit. This comes from the hardware. Since distressors were mono units, when you wanted to use them in stereo, you needed to connect a cable between the two units and press the link button on the hardware. Well, we have that in the plugin, of course, when using it in stereo, and it ensures that the same amount of gain reduction is applied to the left side as the right, so that your stereo image doesn't shift. And here is a pro tip for you. On the hardware, even on a mono use of the distressor, if you engaged the link button, it would increase the harmonic distortion and the aggression of the compressor. This was sort of a quirk of the hardware, and we have modeled it in the plugin. So if you're using a distressor on a mono track, be sure to check this out. Hit that link button and you'll notice that it gets it more aggressive and more harmonic distortion, and it's pretty cool. And of course, from here, if I keep clicking, I can add the high pass, the band emphasis, and of course, high pass band emphasis all along with link. Another option here is to click directly on the LEDs and shift click on another LED to add them, so you don't have to toggle through all of the various states. So let's continue to the right and talk about the audio section. And the first thing to note is, yes, these are in the audible path and you will hear them. And this allows for some really cool tone shaping. So first, of course, is no LEDs lit, and there will be no special processing happening here. Our first click of the audio button engages an 80 Hertz high pass filter with an 18 dB per octave slope. So it's a little further down and it's more steep. So you're not gonna want to engage this on kick drums or any kind of bass material, but it is excellent for cleaning up guitars, vocals, and other things. Now, a second press of the audio button engages distortion 2. These are second order harmonics. You can think of this as a driven tube circuit, and it will add a little bit of that distortion character. Another button press, and we add the filter onto distortion 2 circuit. Another button press, and we're into distortion 3. This is odd ordered harmonic or third harmonic distortion that is more like tape. And of course, the next button push will add the high pass filter into that. You can also click and shift click on these to arrive at the combination that you want. And lastly, in the upper right-hand corner, we have our power switch toggle, which of course bypasses the processor. And if you're using the UAD DSP version, it also relinquishes the DSP. So now that I've walked you through each function and control in detail, let's take a listen to what this compressor can do to a vocal. I've got 2 presets here stored for you to kind of show the flexibility of it. Of course, this compressor is capable of so many different sounds. I chose 2 for you, but before we hear those, let's listen to the raw vocal.
Started with some muscle and developed the flow. The point stands, I'm the realest I know. Put on a beat, I get it in my zone. Nobody help, I'll be good on my own. It's all love, I ain't got no foes, you see.
So it's sounding good, it's great performance, but he's not sounding super out in front and authoritative. So I want to engage the compressor with my first preset, and this is an aggressive one. You can see attack is fast, release is fast, and I have the distortion circuit engaged, so we're getting some of that tube-like drive. And the ratio is 6:1. So let me start with it off again and I'll turn it on.
Started with some muscle and developed the flow. The point stands, I'm the realest I know. Put on a beat, I get it in my zone. Nobody help, I'll be good on my own. It's all love, I ain't got no foes. You see, I'm living this life like I'm golden. I'm rolling, chosen. See me wide out in the open. All it really takes is a little devotion. Mix it with talent, I found a balance.
So we're getting a much more aggressive, authoritative vocal. And not just the dynamics are changed. His breaths are more accentuated and the chestiness of his voice has been brought forward. Now, I've got a second one here for you, and I'm going to switch to this partway through. And on the second preset, you'll notice that I've slowed down the attack, I've slowed down the release, and I have turned off the distortion filter. So let me toggle between those 2 so that you can hear the difference.
Started with some muscle and developed the flow. The point stands, I'm the realest I know. Put on a beat, I get it in my zone. Nobody help, I'll be good on my own. It's all love, I ain't got no foes. You see, I'm living this life like I'm golden. I'm rolling, chosen. See me wide out in the open. All it really takes is a little devotion. Mix it with talent, I found a balance.
So either of those could work in the mix. It's really down to personal preference. The first preset, way more aggressive, way more in your face. The second one, still controlling the dynamics, but much cleaner and a little bit smoother. So lots of options to be had here. So I hope this video has helped you to get better at understanding and using the Distressor for all of your compression tasks. Be sure to like and subscribe and hit that bell button so you're notified of all new UA content. And let me know in the comments what you'd like to see in a future video. I want to hear from you. I'll see you next time.